Last time the picture was like this, but perhaps with some differences. What is what? The first question of psychology as a science is how does primary information get into man's psyche? If there is no information in man's psyche, then there is no personality. This question is not even posed in psychology of the European type. Last time I said that the methodology of cognition in the religious and secular world understandings looks different. In the religious world understanding, the answer to this question is simple. A person, from the moment, well, probably, of the formation of the rudiments of the brain, receives primary information directly from the Almighty in the mode of division of the whole picture of the world, the entire flow of feelings into this, not this, a kind of binary code. What is next? Attention can be likened to a locator. The locator spins, scans space, and generally speaking, its task is to see the flash of this, when this is highlighted against the background of everything else that is not this. And then comes the turn of the intellect. What has been caught by the attention has to undergo intellectual processing, as a result of which, somewhere in the depths of the psyche, there forms a worldview as a model of the world. Worldviews can be of two fundamentally different types. A kaleidoscopic worldview, when the picture of the world is assembled from various images, and these images are in no way connected with each other, or their interconnections are conditioned by the current situation. A Mosaic worldview, when the images are connected with each other, and these interconnections are conditioned by the very images of the culture of intellectual activity and the objective laws of being of the world, of which man, his intellect, his worldview, is a part. And if the worldview is expressed in linguistic forms, then we get a world understanding as a set of concepts, since the concept is an unambiguous interconnection of a certain image in the inner world and some linguistic forms. Moreover, articulate speech is not a necessary thing. It can be the language of mathematics or some other symbolic language that is used to describe the world, the programming of the development of situations. Then it turns out that in the end, the individual's task is to solve a kind of Rubik's Cube. Why? Because if the worldview is likened to one face, and the world understanding to another face, then there is no connection between them, and there are four more faces of the Rubik's Cube. If you have correctly assembled your worldview, and at the level of linguistic forms, or at the level of connections of linguistic forms, with impeccable grammar, spelling, lexicon, vocabulary, you have a mess. These connections are not established properly. Then there will always be some troubles. This tells us about the fact that things should be called by their proper names. And in questions of social life, calling things by their proper names is contrary to what is called political correctness. Political correctness is a very harmful phenomenon in the life of society, although it enables one in some cases to avoid offense and reaction of the offended, mainly justifiably offended. But nonetheless, political correctness destroys culture. If we turn to the history of Russia, then the main problem is that over the past 1,000 years approximately, or maybe more, fools have ceased to be called fools, and scoundrels have ceased to be called scoundrels. A worldview is necessary in order to model the flow of events at a pace that is ahead of the real flow. If you can model a certain process faster than it actually flows, and moreover, faster not by some fractions of a percent, but by a significant number, then, within the time the process is flowing, you can model a whole bunch of variants. From the whole plurality of variants, you can choose one or a certain interconnected subplurality that you will implement in life. If there is one variant, this is understandable. But if there is a subplurality, then the subplurality should be characterized by what I drew in one of the first lectures, the vector of objectives of governance. This is a hierarchy. The first objective is the most important, and in the last place, there is the most unimportant objective. That is, the subplurality should be built in such a way, the cutting off of objectives that for some reason you cannot achieve when carrying out this process does not lead to the fact that you are forced to abandon the achievement of the first, most significant objective, for the sake of which you started the process of governance. This is what concerns the worldview. Again, I am talking about the fact that the Mosaic worldview can be of two types: assembled in the direction from the beloved self to the borders of the universe, and assembled in the reverse order, from everything in general to the beloved self, or to the object with which we are going to deal, with which we are going to work. The worldview, assembled in the order from the beloved self to the limits of everything in general, sooner or later reaches such a level that a flight of fantasy begins. When the flight of fantasy begins, then there appears literal understanding of the crystal vault of heaven, flat earth standing on 3 elephants, a turtle, and other pictures of the world. And when the worldview is assembled in the reverse order, from the limits of everything in general to the beloved self, or to the object with which you are going to deal, it goes differently. Because whatever kind of image of the holistic world is always present in man's psyche, yes, there is something beyond the limits of perception, but again, in the religious world understanding, if something is beyond the limits of perception, then it's not within our competence, but within the competence of the Almighty. And accordingly, there is no special sense for you to get in there with your self-concoction until approval of this is given in this form. That is, something appears given to you in distinction, something which you can think about. And what is within the limits of your perception, in the perceptions of people of past generations, goes into the worldview. And if, for example, you do not have enough detailedness in the picture of the world, then no one holds you back from going to the library and getting acquainted with what other professionals wrote about this, or from being engaged in subject research of this question yourself. Moreover, there is one more thing. Everything that is lifeful is afraid of doubts. Therefore, the Holy Inquisition appeared in this or that form, which defended the truth in its purity. The truth, elevated to the rank of unquestionable, undoubtable dogma, begins to deceive and mislead a person. And if there is doubt about the truth of anything, even the Pythagorean theorem, or about the truth that 2 times 2 equals 4, and if a person sincerely tries to cognize, then he comes to the same Pythagorean theorem, perhaps in a different way. And if he really cognizes this broadly and deeply, then he finally understands that the Pythagorean theorem is a particular case of the Cauchy-Schwarz inequality. But he can never come to any false conclusion if he is really engaged in cognition sincerely, but not in order to impose his opinion as truth on the surrounding society and descendants. Therefore, what is true is really not afraid of doubts, because the question on the personal culture of cognition arises, and then in this case, a person will anyway come to this truth, either himself or with the help of others, but he cannot pass it by in any way. Therefore, there is no point in protecting the truth as such from distortions, but it makes sense to protect the gnosiological subculture in society, a subculture that tells us about how a person cognizes the world, how cognition makes the basis of creativity, something new, and then true freedom opens up. Because if a person does not master a personal cognitive creative culture, then he turns out to be completely dependent on the carriers of certain knowledge, who for him are either consultants or direct manipulators or masters of his will, who tell him, go there, do this, oh, you haven't done it the way that you, fool, were taught. And if a person masters a personal cognitive creative culture, then an attempt to mislead him is accompanied by the fact that he either reveals malicious intent to the one who does it, or reveals glitches in the psyche of the one who does it. And accordingly, he can contribute to the personal development and a release from glitches of the one who is trying to manipulate him. This question is related to the conception of copyrights and related rights. In ancient Rus culture, it was not customary to put the author's mark on any work. Why? Because the following ethics prevailed. The creator of all this is the Almighty, and we are only transmitters. When personal copyrights appear, then this, in principle, is a different culture. This is a culture that firstly separates people, and secondly, it enslaves people through the system of personal copyrights and related rights. And in addition, it identifies errors in culture, because if there exists a certain open product that is not marked by personal copyrights, you can use it the way you like. And if you are smart enough, and your creative culture allows it, you can improve this product. If the product is protected by personal copyrights, then in order to improve it, you have to buy a license that implies or directly states that you are granted the right to upgrade this product. If this is not the case, then you don't have the right to make any changes, because by doing so, you infringe on personal copyrights. Here is a particular concrete example. There is a tractor corporation, John Deere. American farmers download programs hacked in Ukraine, Belarus and Russia, programs that control the John Deere tractor, because in this case, the downloaded hacked program does not indicate such things as when a farmer's tractor breaks down in the middle of the field, he needs to replace one nut. But if he replaces it, then this is a copyright crime against John Deere. And in a situation where the day feeds the year, he cannot wait for a day for a qualified specialist from John Deere to arrive and screw the nut that the farmer can screw himself. Therefore, the whole conception of personal copyrights, which has taken shape in the West and which is being imposed on us, is absurd, harmful, and dangerous for the development of our country and humanity as a whole. Why is it dangerous? Because it blocks access to certain psychotechniques, which enables one to qualitatively raise the level of the information product that arises as a result of any type of creativity. There exists a theme that is not discussed in textbooks. This is the theme of how ancient Egypt was governed. I seem to have already drawn this. For several thousand years, Egypt was governed by two teams of jretzes. The total number of people was 22, 10 in the north, 10 in the south, headed by the 11th first hierarchs. The system has been kept unchanged for many centuries, but the system contains such a feature that situations are inevitable when both teams come to a mutually exclusive opinion on the same question. And in order to govern, one opinion is required. How are the questions on how to choose one of the two opinions resolved? The most primitive variant is an odd number of voters with a ban on abstaining. Whichever quality of decision will be made, and it will go further along the chain. But if this decision is erroneous, then what will happen? There will be erroneous governance and a whole array of troubles. Therefore, this variant will not do. The second variant is casting lots. The Quran says that casting lots is from Satan. Those who want, believe. Those who don't want, do not believe. But nonetheless, if we turn to this question, then these are the guys who master what is today called extrasensory perception. In ancient times it was called magic. If one understands that a person emits something, then a person simply cannot but be a magus, and the emission of something, one way or another, impacts the surrounding world. Therefore, for people who master this, a practice of the type, let's throw a penny, if it falls heads up it means one decision, if it falls heads down it's another decision, is a competition of whose willpower is cooler. And accordingly, throwing a penny or another lot in one way or another does not at all guarantee that this is really a decision dictated from above. It's just that the will of the one who turned out to be stupider was stronger than the will of the one who was smarter. And again, as a result of this system, we have an erroneous decision, on the basis of which further governance is built. Nothing good comes of it either. Then what is left to do? What is left to do is what I said last time. If here, everyone has a sufficiently effective cognitive creative culture, then if both teams come to mutually exclusive conclusions on the same question, then both teams come up with another question. Who is wrong, and in what? In this case, the situation turns out to be the following. If we are engaged in a common cause, and even more so, in a cause of God, then we co-participate in it, but we are not authors in the sense of personal copyrights. If this understanding exists not only at the level of words, but it also exists at the level of personal feelings, then it becomes possible to analyze this whole chain and find in it that element due to which, concerning the same question, two independent teams worked out mutually exclusive opinions. What could this be? Informedness. Some had one source of initial data, and the others had another. Some did not know one thing, and the others did not know something else. If the databases are combined, Then there appears initial databases for solving a task, but already for another, broader task. And in this case, if there really was a difference in the initial data, then one can go through this task again, and if everything is okay, there will be worked out a certain different solution. The third variant. Someone missed something. Attention wasn't working properly, and some information was not processed by intellect. This is also a variety of the fact that not all data were known to some, but were known to others. If you rewind your internal memory into the past, then such moments when you missed something are recalled. Moreover, one more thing must be emphasized here. In the Russian language there is a word, пережить заново, which means to live through it again. And there is the word вспомнить, which means to recall. And the word вспомнить, to recall, has the same root with the word мнить, to imagine. Living through something again is to evoke in the present the flow of feelings that was in the past. If you are able to live through the lecture again at the exam, then you can, at least in a parrot tape recorder mode, give the teacher the words that he said by copying him from the lecture. And he will be very pleased, although you may not know anything at the same time. Meanwhile, to recall means a game of imagination when we substitute reliable information with the help of our imagination. And if we can live through something again, we know how to do it, then we can go to the moment when something was given to us in distinction. But we did not catch this with our attention. This remained without intellectual processing. And in this case, we are able to fill in the part that we missed beforehand. Well, if we can't, then we have a kaleidoscope in the head. Intellect has to be a holistic process. But if our mosaic is split into two fragments, then at the level of intellect, some part will work with one fragment of the mosaic, and the other part will work with another fragment of the mosaic. And then the solution that the split intellect produces will be internally conflicted. And in principle, if people are concerned about coming to the correct solution, then such intellectual errors are also revealed. Well, then a corrected worldview, a corrected world understanding appears. And then the input flow of information is on the one side of the scale, and the worldview is on the other side of the scale, and the intellect acts as the comparator scale. That is, the input flow of information correlates with the model of the world that is formed in the person's psyche. Therefore, man is the measure of all things. But in this metaphor, the weight should not be fake. Because if the weight is fake, then the input flow of information is evaluated incorrectly, and the decision that is worked out entails erroneous behavior, which is accompanied by this or that damage. Now imagine that this procedure works in a condition where people are enslaved by the idea of personal copyrights. In this situation, it turns out like this. Subject number 1 says, "So this is." Subject number 2 says, "No, you're wrong." Subject number 1, "How could I be wrong? These are my personal copyrights." And it turns out that one cannot enter into this procedure. Our personal culture is perfected in the overwhelming majority of cases not as a result of the fact that we have a conversation with ourselves. Our personal culture of cognition and creativity is perfected when we communicate with other people. Moreover, in a number of cases, an exchange of opinions is not even necessary. If we turn to such a phenomena that was in Russian culture as starets, then we will see that not all staretses had a university education, or some kind of good education like the one received by Ignatiy Bryanchaninov. Many staretses did not have any education, but nonetheless, people came to them, talked with them, and after talking with them, the people came to some new for them opinions on those questions that had previously caused them bewilderment. What is the reason? What happens? A very simple thing happens. Two intellects combine into one intellect at the biofield level, and those information flows, which were torn apart during the isolated work of one intellect, join with some information flows in the individual intellect of the second person. Information processes acquire completeness, and a person is able to free himself from some of his personal psychological algorithmic errors and rise to a different quality of world understanding, to a different quality of cognition, creativity of the world. But this system works more efficiently the fewer claims for personal copyrights. As soon as there appear claims to the result, a person is left alone with all the glitches that he managed to accumulate in his psyche. And there are no means in nature and in society that can rid him of these glitches. Because the only way to get rid of these glitches is the abandonment of personal copyrights and mutual work on the theme of what is the first one wrong about and what is the other one wrong about. But the first one or the other require, in addition to abandoning personal copyrights, some minimum level of personal cognitive creative culture. And in order not to have this personal cognitive creative culture, we have a falsification in the form of the laws of dialectics written by Hegel, inherited by Marx, and transmitted by the entire system of philosophical education in Russia. If the task of building a worldview is fulfilled, then a person acts in life on the basis of those automatisms that are inherent in his worldview and on the unconscious levels of his intellect. That is, it all works in an autopilot mode. And then the question arises, is this mode single variant or not? This mode is not single variant. The normal mode, which ensures the highest level of personal safety and the safety of others, is concluded in the fact that the worldview, like antivirus computer systems, has its own quarantine. What is the essence? The essence is that information that is not evaluated as reliable or inherently false needs additional processing. This information does not go directly into the worldview, but it goes into the quarantine. And for some time, the psyche processes it to detect whether the information is reliable or deceitful. While this information remains in this status, it is excluded from the process of working out of decisions, because if this information is deceitful and it is planted to you purpose-orientedly, and you make a decision on its basis, then this decision may be identical to the program of implementation that a manipulator expects from you. If the information settles in the quarantine, then manipulation over you is excluded, because this information does not participate in the working out of decisions. If you act in life correctly, then the transfer of information from the quarantine into the worldview, with the sign of false or truly false, depending on the circumstances, is carried out. But it is carried out proactively in relation to the situation when the need to use this information factually arises. All you need to do is pick it up in time, load it into the quarantine in time, and in time, process all the information that enables it to be transferred into the worldview. But it takes time. This branch takes time. If there is not enough time, then this is an indicator showing that you are out of the optimal mode. And accordingly, you load everything into the worldview at once. That is, it follows this chain: attention, intellect, worldview, but the governorial decision is made on the basis of all this as before, the worldview as a whole. If your worldview is not overloaded with a large number of errors, then in fact, you will make a more or less correct decision. It may not be the best, but nonetheless the other components of the worldview will keep you, in the process of intellectual processing, from making not that decision that is needed. The worst variant is when a governorial decision is worked out on the basis of the flow of information without correlating it with the worldview, but directly correlating it with the intellect. It is the fastest in terms of performance speed because the input flow of the information is smaller in volume than everything that is in your worldview. But if you are put in such a situation that you are forced to build your behavior exclusively or predominantly on the input flow of information, not correlating it with the whole worldview and world understanding, then you have climbed very far somewhere which is not the right where. Because the easiest way to manipulate is to drive a person precisely into this scheme. The input flow of information and the reaction, the faster, the better. Hence the desire of many to knock people out of their emotion-meaning tuning, so that the reaction is instant emotional. This is exactly the case when the worldview is excluded. And if you say stop to your emotions, then there will be a different governorial decision and a different line of behavior. Last time, in the earlier lectures, The question of the criterion of truth was touched upon. Well, it is stupid to argue. Practice is the criterion of truth, although there are some people who believe that this is not so. But nonetheless, the principle works, and if the theory promises you one result, you do everything in accordance with the theory, you get the promised result, then everything is fine. And if the theory promises one result, but at the end we have a different result, then something is wrong. Either the theory is totally absurd, or you fail to use it correctly, or circumstances cause some other factors that the theory does not take into account, and side effects take place. But in this variant, the principle practices the criterion of truth works post factum. That is, you take a certain theory, do something, get a result, and then evaluate the result, whether it corresponds to the theory or not. Well, if the result is negative, when you took action you had no right to make a mistake. Such situations also arise in life, they occur regularly. Well, if they occur regularly in life, then the question arises, how does the principle of practices the criterion of truth work in them? It turns out that it also works in them. Only in order for this principle to work in them, it has to work not in a stupid way, directly with the results of the theory, but it has to work through intuition. Because if in the aspect of personal, creative, cognitive culture everything is fine, then intuition is somewhere here, at the level of attention. Intuition should notify that the theory that you are going to use, the recipe that you are going to implement, either in general or in given specific circumstances, is not functionally operable. And the result will be different, not what the theory promises. And here the subtleties of personal psychology begin. Because there are many convinced that intuition does not exist. Others, having encountered its manifestations in their lives, ignored the manifestations of their intuition and ended up with a whole mess of troubles, or found themselves on the verge of troubles. Someone has different statistics. In those cases, when he did not ignore his intuition, the troubles either did not arise at all, or they arose in someone else's life, but he was not there with that person. Along with this, there is a category of people who are really over-anxious. The absence of information causes the work of fantasy in their psyche that somewhere, some nightmare has happened. Many parents suffer from this when their children have a walk somewhere and do not come back home on time. Then it is simply impossible for them to think that the bus is late, so their children are late too. But imagining a whole slew of nightmares for them is a piece of cake. And what does the principle, practices the criterion of truth, have to do with it? If a person again enters into the mode, live through again, it turns out that in those situations when his intuition warned him against something, the person had one emotion meaning tuning, and in those situations when his imagination unbridledly painted nightmares and these nightmares had no limit, at that time his emotion meaning tuning was different. If one learns to distinguish these two emotion meaning tunings in oneself, learns to bring oneself to the correct emotion meaning tuning, then nightmares do not appear. One's own intuition warns one against troubles in time, and one meaningfully comprehends the absence of information in the style of the English proverb, "No news is good news." That is, if there is no information, that means this is already good information. And why is there no information, good information, if a person has the correct emotion meaning tuning? Because, again, everything I say in the atheistic worldview is meaningless. But in the religious worldview, it has a deep meaning and is fully consistent with the logic of the sufficiently general theory of governance. If you carry out general governance towards a certain self-governed system in the mode of hierarchically higher in relation to it governance, then what? If this self-governed system acts in the way that you think is acceptable, is it necessary to intervene in its behavior? It is not necessary. But if tendencies have just shown up in the system, or possibilities have opened up that this system will approach a catastrophe, is it necessary to intervene in governance? Yes, it is necessary. If one looks into history, then in history in general, there are no memorable cases when there were favorable prognoses. History remembers a whole array of negative prophecies that came true. Negative prophecies that came true. This is when there was a certain intuitive insight. The mechanism of intuition is another theme, But the main thing is that there was an intuitive insight which said that there would be some troubles in the future. That is, there was a warning, but they did not react to it. As a result, they landed in trouble up to the neck. So the question on intuition is also connected with this. It is connected in two ways, both with the personal cognitive creative culture and with the principle, practice is the criterion of truth. Because the principle, practice is the criterion of truth in relation to the future, manifests itself precisely in the fact that intuition warns one against what one should not do. But in order to take advantage of this, one needs to integrate it into one's own psyche. There are many people who are intuitively sometimes very developed, but integrating an intuitive warning into the process of working out of decisions is for them an outrageous task. And then they get the trouble that their intuition warned them against. Therefore, the principle, practice is the criterion of truth, is real. It really knows no exceptions. It can work in relation to the past, post factum, when the result is consistent with the previously promised by the theory or something else, prognosis, and it can work in relation to the future, but in the logic of the relationship of the hierarchically lower and the hierarchically higher governance, when the hierarchically higher governance warns against actions, giving a picture of future troubles. But this implies a meaningful reaction to a negative prognosis. In this there is also nothing new. The Chinese have such a saying, if you do not change direction, you may end up where you are heading. The saying is very deep, but it's exactly about this. Further on, the same question with which we began. Well, everything is set out now. The question is, what does culture of cognition and creativity look like in the religious worldview? The main question, is there God? All this can be recognized as functionally operable, provided that God is. And if there is no evidence that God is, that he really co-participates in what is happening on earth, and his co-participation is not meaningless and not deprived of an objective, then everything that I said in the previous 2 lectures is simply divorced from life demagoguery. And then we are left alone with the European philosophical tradition of gnoseology, where Hegel and others are great people, and it is almost impossible to use this gnoseology. The answer to this question, I say again, belongs to ethics, and is also confirmed by the principle practice is the criterion of truth. And if you turn to the Quran has a direct statement. And when my servants question thee concerning me, then surely I am nigh. I answer the prayer of the suppliant when he crieth unto me. So let them hear my call, and let them trust in me, in order that they may be led aright. That is, it comes to the fact that a person should live in dialogue with God. And the proofs of the existence of God, God gives everyone himself. They are of a nravious ethical character, unique, connected with the innermost of every person. And in this sense, proofs cannot be falsified and imitated, because when it comes to what is in the innermost, this is really known only by you and by God. And if you do not tell anyone about what is in your innermost, then this is not revealed by any psychic or telepath, no one at all. And then the question is simple. After God answers, what is the person's reaction? There are 2 variants. If this is recognized as an answer, then the question arises on how to build one's own personal relationships with God. They are unique, but they nonetheless form for everyone. And the second variant, this is just pure coincidence, causeless, objectiveless, or in general what has happened is unworthy of the greatness of God in the form of how one understands it, so this is no proof that God exists, or there is reasoning on the theme that if God existed, then he would not allow those villainies and outrages on earth to happen. But if again we correlate with the norms of ethics, then God will never do for people that which people can do themselves. This applies to the villainies and outrages that are happening on earth. People are able to themselves behave differently, and are able to not commit these villainies and outrages, and as a result, the life of the planet will be transformed. But there are hindrances when people want proof of the existence of God not in the form in which God offers, speaking with a person in the language of life circumstances, but in some kind of their own way. Well, then we get what we get. In addition, as I said, cultures are variable. but the typology of cultures is, generally speaking, not big. The main questions are the relation towards creative potential and towards the formation of a personal culture of cognition and creativity. And the second question is the relation towards Sovest and Will. If it is believed that Sovest, will, personal culture of cognition and creativity should be personal characteristics of everyone, then we can live a normal life. Whether it is believed or not even thought about, nonetheless, culture is built in such a way that Sovest, shame, and will are suppressed by parents in early childhood, when parents demand unconditional obedience from their children, and therewith intellect is suppressed, because if you have achieved obedience, then your children's creativity is not needed. But if creativity is acceptable, then you must recognize your children's rights to make mistakes. And the right to make a mistake can manifest itself very unpleasantly, but you anyway have to recognize this right. In addition, you have to prevent it, so that this creativity carries blago, and is of a constructive character. In this case, the right to make mistakes will not manifest itself in any troubles. Well, if a culture is what it factually is, a textbook on philosophy does not give any intelligible views about how man's psyche works in the process of cognition and creativity, then there appears a narrow group of so-called intellectuals. Some of them produce some applicative knowledge, and some of them are engaged in the fact that on the basis of this applicative knowledge, they manipulate large masses of people who themselves do not know how to feel the world and do not know how to think. These are the main problems not only of Russia, but of the entire global civilization. So, last time I could not put everything in one lecture, and there was more than one lecture but less than two. Therefore now and here, there is the opportunity to debate or discuss some other questions. If we turn to computer science and algorithms, we have the following block diagrams. There are such things as condition, yes, no. A condition is usually expressed like this. A certain standard, a certain function is correlated with this standard, depending on the circumstances. In algorithms, this is called a conditional jump operator, and it governs information flows. Here is a simple example. Two copies of the same algorithm. In one algorithm, y is more than 2. In the other, y is more than 20. How will the algorithms work? If y is more than 20, then both will go along the yes line. If y is in the range from 20 to 2, then one algorithm will go along the yes line, and the other one along the no line. If y is less than 2, then both will go along the no line. When we say nravious standards, then in the psyche of every one of us, there is also something equivalent, in the sense of function, to the conditional jump operator. Like, dislike. It governs all information flows in the intellectual activity, memory, and senses. Therefore, there are things that a person can never come to with the help of his thinking until he changes his nraviousness. Here is an example. There was an outstanding economist named Vasily Leontiev, a Nobel Prize laureate, who worked with input-output analysis all his life. And in the end he admitted that the input-output method poses many questions rather than answers them. Leontiev, in one of his economic essays, recalls the episode from the New Testament when Jesus fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread. And Leontiev poses the question, this unlimited universal availability of knowledge and ideas by research is certainly a very desirable property for society and for mankind as a whole. But it creates a serious problem for anyone who would like to engage in research, that is, in the production of knowledge as a business enterprise. To justify investment and research, a corporation must be able to sell its results directly or indirectly as a component part of some other product for a price. But who would pay for a good which, once it has been produced, becomes available to everyone in an unlimited amount? Why not wait until someone else pays for it or invests in its production and then have a free ride? Who would want to enter a bakery business if 7 loaves of bread baked by anyone could still the hunger not only of a multitude of 4,000 men and women and children besides, as it is told in the New Testament, but also of anyone else who cares to partake of it? In other words, he means to say that knowledge should be sold. And if that very input-output balance method is interpreted on the basis of the sufficiently general theory of governance, and if we proceed from the fact that the tasks of the economy as a system are not to ensure the profitability of many private enterprises, but the tasks of the economy are to ensure products and benefits of nature to the life of society and the politics of the state, then a very simple thing becomes clear. There is such a branch of applied mathematics as the theory of duality of linear programming. And there is the following theorem. If a certain resource in the primal is in excess in relation to the constraints, that is, an inequality is strictly fulfilled, this resource is greater than the constraints, then the optimal price of this resource in the dual is 0. So if we correlate with the question of prices, then prices at the level of macroeconomics are a constraint on consumption by the financial solvency of people. That is, the price is a measure of the deficiency. If the economy develops and there is more supply, then prices go down. If the supply fully covers the demands, then prices drop to 0. In other words, the conclusion is simple. The price list is a financial manifestation of the vector of error of self-governance of society. As soon as there is an error somewhere, a price immediately appears. If there are more people in public places than the real capacity of these places, then entrances to beaches, parks, and other public places are fee-paying. If the population in cities is dense and the density of cars is more than the infrastructure allows, there appears a question on the fee-paying entrance into the city. Parking is fee-paying, the entrance to certain areas of the city is fee-paying, and so on and so forth. That is, the price really acts as a component of the vector of error of governance. If the economy is truly oriented on the satisfaction of the needs of society, then the ideal mode of functional operation is in fact zero cost for every end user. Another question is how this zero cost can be provided. Either the provision is really free of charge through social consumption funds, as it was in the Soviet times, free trips to recreation centers, or since the financial credit systems are an instrument of macroeconomic governance, then such a thing as unconditional income, also known as unconditional basic income, may appear, that is, amounts that are paid to citizens regardless of their participation in labor. Further, the only question is in the fact that by measure of the growth of the economy, the value of this unconditional income, by measure of decrease in prices, will cover all normal human needs. But here another question arises. The question on nraviousness and culture of society. Because we can say that the price list is a vector of error, but the task of zeroing the price list has no purely financial economic solutions. This is a pan-cultural task. And accordingly, if the minority is able to feed and arrange the daily life of the majority, then what will the freed from the need to work in production majority do? Now, if one reads to students excerpts from the work of Stalin, Economic Problems of Socialism in the USSR, where it comes to the reduction of the duration of the working day to 5 or more hours, and if one asks the audience, what will happen? There will be silence in the audience, and then several voices will say all together, we will be drunk all the time. To put it differently, the question is related to the fact that if there is enough goods, then what will a person do? If there is a meaning in life that is not related to the providing of daily bread, then the society can exist. If there is no meaning in life that ensures the occupation of a person's creative potential with something, then humanity reproduces the experiment Universe 25. A paradise for mice and rats, lots of food, nests as much as was wanted. Several generations pass, and biological degeneration begins. Moreover, different sources describe this experiment in different ways, and one of them is similar to an experiment performed on rats in Novosibirsk. Unlike those mice and rats, the rats in Novosibirsk gnawed through the floor and escaped from this paradise. Why did the experiment lead to this result? Because the dynamics of reproduction of a population is enclosed to what in biology is called natural selection. And if a population is removed from the mode of natural selection, and if it continues to reproduce on the basis of faunal laws, then those who should have fallen prey to natural selection give defective offspring. Further on, the defective offspring gives even more defective offspring, and a crisis begins. This is how communism, or paradise on earth, is protected. Either a person becomes a human, or it is not for bandologs. Communism is not for bandologs. V.O. Kluchevsky, at the end of the 19th century, characterized the projects of the socialist reorganization of society. He said the following phrase: "The society of a nravious community made up of scoundrels." This is impossible in principle, and it explains a lot in the history of Russia, and not only of Russia. The West follows a different path, a society of scoundrels and natural selection, what is called social Darwinism. They are convinced that this is good, but a person has to be a human and not a bandolog. Therefore, the West falls under the impact of the same laws that worked in Universe 25. Besides, there is one more law, what in ethology is called innate morality. Strongly equipped species have high innate morality, weakly equipped species have low innate morality. If to nullify culture, man is a herd pack monkey. He is of a herd pack type because he is weakly equipped and cannot survive alone if he is a monkey. Well, afterwards, a weakly equipped herd pack monkey with low innate morality begins to develop civilization, preserving his objective herd monkey essence. Then there is an increase in the power supply, science, military affairs, magic appear, and it turns out that the monkey has ceased to be a weakly equipped species. If the monkey preserves weak innate morality, then it is simply a question of time before the monkey itself destroys civilization. There is only one way out of this trap: become human. And in order to be a human, Sovest, shame, potential for personal development, intellect, possibility of mastering a cognitive creative culture, and transforming civilization on this basis are given from above. But it really works under the governance of nraviousness. If nraviousness is pravious, it works for blago. If nraviousness is satanic, self-destruction is inevitable. It is a question of time. Well, again, what was said before. The saying that when God wants to punish someone, he deprives them of reasoning. That is, there is something wrong with intellect. It is wrong because God wants to punish someone, and he deprives him of distinction. If there is no distinction, then the world understanding and worldview are unchanged, and what is in them loses its relevance in relation to the changing life. And accordingly, decisions worked out on the basis of the worldview that has lost its relevance cease to be effective. Back in the Soviet times, one of my friends told me that he was engaged in ICSs, industrial control systems. One of the large enterprises asked him and his team to make an ICS. Well, they studied the enterprise, drew the algorithms, programmed them, arrived there and installed everything. While the team was in the enterprise, everything was fine. A month later, they received a hysterical telegram. Nothing works, the ICS makes absurd decisions. When the team arrived, it turned out that since his team had left, they in the enterprise had never updated the database on the basis of which the ICS worked. They did not maintain it in a relevant state. And within that month, someone quit, someone new began to work in the enterprise, some orders were carried out, some orders were received, and the database on the basis of which the ICS worked out decisions was a month old. It did not know who had quit, who had come, which orders had been fulfilled, which had not. The same thing happens with man's psyche, when he behaves so badly that distinction bypasses him. The Quran directly states that distinction is given according to nraviousness. That is, it is given on the basis of the considerations of the Almighty on the theme of how a person should develop. In the wisdom of Solomon and in the New Testament, the Holy Spirit is the guide into all truth. At the same time, the wisdom of Solomon says that into a malicious soul wisdom shall not enter, nor dwell in the body that is subject unto sin. In other words, it is the same thing. If a person's nraviousness is not pravious, then until he bethinks himself, nothing new will happen. And what is already in his psyche, It, in principle, enables him to bethink himself, bring things into order in his psyche, nraviousness, and worldview, and only after that, something new will be given to him in distinction, which will enable him to move on in life. But again, one more thing is related to the scheme. In most cases, in crowd elite societies, one of the relevant questions is, who is more intelligent? And there are people who are convinced that yes, they are indeed very intelligent. You see, the situation with intellectual power is such that it is not measured as body weight in kilograms, it is measured in relation to the tasks that a person can solve. Therefore, if someone believes that he is very intelligent, his intellectual power is excessive, and there are some idiots around him, then in reality, this means a very simple thing. This person is engaged in some nonsense, by virtue of which and in relation to which his intellectual power is really excessive. But if he was engaged in a really useful endeavor, then he would find that his intellectual power for this useful endeavor is at a minimum level, but it enables him to enter into this endeavor, and his intellectual power will increase, only depending on how he enters into this endeavor and whether he does so successfully. In this respect, the TV program What, Where, When is very indicative. Many people like to watch it. It is such an intellectual testing ground. But it would be interesting to see something else. If these guys in the program were given real tasks of pan-social and state significance, then the real empty chatter of all these intellectuals would manifest itself undeniably and vividly. The fact that some of them have succeeded in banking or some kind of business, banking business is actually a non-zero-sum game, a kind of 3-shell P game, but this is a 3-shell P game in especially large volumes, with signs of high treason to the motherland if qualified juridically. So this fact is by no means an indicator that this is really a club of intellectuals and that this is a real intellectual elite of the country. If any relevant task, any problem that the country is facing is given to them, then they will become a laughingstock, in spite of the fact that they are from different professional spheres. And it would seem that they could form a collective intellect that would enable them to solve a problem, or at least form general principles for solving the problem during the program. However, this would be nothing but emptiness. What is called an effective contract and all scientometrics is an incentive for graphomania. If one studies the history of science, one will discover the following. Epochal ideas were put forward by only a few people that are unseen in the era of statistics. These epochal ideas are understandable to a not very wide circle of people, at best 10 times wider than those who put forward these epochal ideas. They develop these epochal ideas into theories of fundamental science. This group of proponents of ideas and the ones who bring these ideas to the level of scientific theories probably makes up about 3% of the total number of those who are considered scientists. What is next? There are outstanding teachers. An outstanding teacher may not be able to put forward even at least one idea. But if he understands something, he is able to write an intelligent book from which other people will understand the essence of these questions. When outstanding teachers appear, there are not very many of them, also a few percent. Then there appears a more or less wide circle of people who, on the basis of these epochal ideas and scientific theories in which they are expressed, begin to solve relevant tasks. And now let's take a look. If someone gives birth to an epochal idea, 10 people from those who got acquainted with it understood it. Then what will the citation index be? And in a while the descendants, raking up the archives, will say, this was an epochal idea, but this guy was not accepted into the academy, as in the case with Mendeleev, because what he did from the point of view of academicians was not enough to elect him to the academy. And the fact that the periodic law, the periodic trends, is epochal, this they could not understand. Tsiolkovsky Konstantin Edvardovich, in the city of Kaluga, was considered a city madman. By the way, Tsiolkovsky worked in a very wide range of themes, from bioethics, the relationship between man and nature, to technology. There was an outstanding technician named Alexei Nikolaevich Krylov, an academician. He did a lot of things. He also did not understand, although his intellectual level and knowledge of technology was supposed to be high enough in order to understand and appreciate. So if there is a question on the citation index as an indicator, firstly, it is not customary to cite textbooks, but in most cases, a good textbook is something that needs to be cited, because everything else is graphomania, empty talk. Therefore, what is now accepted as criteria for evaluating scientific activity, the mainstream has never determined the future. High citation ratings are the mainstream.